The day you think you have lost everything may be the day your life finally begins. Sarah Mitchell read the notice for the 5th time, hoping the words would somehow change. They did not. The paper remained as cold and final as it had been when she found it taped to her apartment door that morning. She had 14 days to leave. 14 days before she and her 9-year-old son Noah would no longer have a place to call home. Sarah slowly folded the notice and placed it on the small kitchen counter beside a stack of unpaid bills. The apartment was modest, barely 700 square feet, but it was home. Every corner held memories. The worn sofa where Noah watched cartoons on Saturday mornings. The tiny kitchen where they baked cookies during the holidays. The narrow hallway where school photos hung in mismatched frames. None of it was fancy, but it belonged to their story. Sarah worked full-time at a neighborhood grocery store. She picked up extra shifts whenever possible, often leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. Even then, rising rent and unexpected expenses had slowly pushed her into a corner she could no longer escape. Last winter, Noah had needed medical treatment after a severe case of pneumonia. Insurance helped, but the remaining bills consumed the small savings Sarah had spent years building. Since then, every month had become a balancing act between rent, groceries, utilities, and school expenses. Somehow she always found a way. Until now. A cheerful voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mom, are you okay?" Noah stood in the doorway holding a science project he had been building for school. Sarah immediately forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart." Noah studied her face. He was young, but he had always been observant. "You look worried." Sarah knelt beside him and adjusted the cardboard display in his hands. "Just a long day. That is all." Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Mrs. Parker said my project might win a ribbon." Sarah smiled more genuinely this time. "I think it looks amazing." After Noah returned to his room, Sarah's smile faded. She hated hiding her worries from him, but she refused to let him carry burdens meant for adults. That evening, after dinner, she sat at the kitchen table searching online listings for affordable apartments. Every option seemed impossible. Prices were higher than she expected. Waiting lists stretched for months. The more she searched, the more trapped she felt. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The clock on the wall crept toward 8 o'clock. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and closed her laptop. For the first time in years, she had no plan, no solution, no backup option. Then, just as silence settled over the apartment, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Sarah frowned. She was not expecting anyone. Another knock followed, calm but deliberate. Noah peeked out from his bedroom. "Mom, someone is at the door." Sarah stood and walked across the apartment. Through the peephole, she saw a tall, well-dressed man standing on the porch. He looked completely out of place in the aging apartment complex. Taking a cautious breath, she opened the door. The stranger offered a polite smile. Then he spoke words that instantly sent a chill through her. "Sarah Mitchell, I have been looking for you for a very long time. I have been looking for you for a very long time." The words lingered in Sarah Mitchell's mind as she stared at the stranger standing on her porch. Rain continued to fall behind him, creating a soft curtain of silver beneath the streetlights. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah tightened her grip on the door. Every instinct told her to be cautious. She had never seen this man before. He appeared to be around 40 years old, with neatly styled dark hair, a tailored navy coat, and the kind of calm confidence that suggested he was used to being listened to. Yet there was nothing threatening about him. If anything, he seemed nervous. "Do I know you?" Sarah finally asked. The man offered a polite smile. "No, at least, not personally." That answer only deepened her confusion. Before she could respond, Noah appeared beside her. The young boy looked curiously at the visitor. "Mom, who is it?" Sarah gently placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "I am not sure yet." The stranger glanced at Noah and smiled warmly. "You must be Noah." Sarah immediately stiffened. "How do you know my son's name?" The man seemed to realize how alarming that sounded. "I apologize. I should explain myself better." He reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed a business card. "My name is Ethan Carter." Sarah accepted the card and looked down. The name meant nothing to her, but the company listed beneath it certainly did. Carter Global Enterprises was one of the largest business groups in the state. She had seen the name mentioned in news articles and local television reports. Her eyes widened slightly. "You are the CEO?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." Sarah looked from the card back to the man standing before her. The situation made even less sense now. Why would a successful executive be standing outside her apartment asking for her by name? Ethan seemed to understand her skepticism. I know this must feel strange. Strange is one word for it, Sarah replied. Why are you here? Ethan hesitated. It was the first sign of uncertainty she had seen from him. Because I need to ask you a few questions. Sarah frowned. Questions about what? Ethan looked past her toward the modest apartment. His expression softened as though he recognized something familiar. About someone you helped many years ago. Sarah stared at him. I think you have the wrong person. Ethan slowly shook his head. I do not. The certainty in his voice made her pause. He reached into a leather folder tucked beneath his arm and removed an old photograph. Time had faded the image slightly, but Sarah immediately recognized herself. She looked younger, perhaps 18 or 19 years old. Standing beside her was an elderly man she had not seen in years. The sight stole her breath. Where did you get that? She whispered. Ethan carefully studied her reaction. So you do remember him. Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands. Memories she had not thought about in more than a decade began resurfacing. A freezing winter. A bus station. An elderly stranger sitting alone. Yet before she could piece everything together, Ethan asked a question that sent another wave of confusion through her. Can you tell me what happened on the night you met my grandfather? Can you tell me what happened on the night you met my grandfather? Ethan Carter's question hung in the air as Sarah stared at the faded photograph. For a few seconds, she could only focus on the image. The young woman smiling beside the elderly man seemed like a completely different person from the exhausted mother standing in the doorway now. Yet she remembered that night. Not every detail, but enough to recognize the face. Sarah slowly stepped aside. You should probably come in. Ethan nodded gratefully and entered the apartment. Noah watched the visitor with curiosity before returning to his room after Sarah assured him everything was fine. Once they were seated at the small kitchen table, Sarah placed the photograph between them. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows. It was a long time ago, she said. I was 19. Ethan listened carefully. Sarah searched her memory. I was working evenings at a diner back then. Money was tight. One winter night, I missed my bus home and had to wait at the downtown station. The memories became clearer as she spoke. It was freezing. Most people stayed inside where it was warm. I noticed an older man sitting alone on a bench outside. Ethan's expression remained focused. What happened next? Sarah shrugged slightly. At first, nothing. I thought he was waiting for someone. But after a while, I realized something was wrong. She remembered the concern she had felt that night. The elderly man looked tired, confused, and completely alone. I bought him a cup of coffee from a vending machine and asked if he needed help. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. Sarah continued. He seemed embarrassed. He told me he had gotten lost. The memory made her smile faintly. He kept apologizing for being a bother. Ethan nodded slowly. That sounds like him. Sarah continued describing the evening. The man had trouble remembering phone numbers and addresses. Rather than leaving, she stayed with him for several hours until they eventually contacted a family member who came to pick him up. That was all, she said. I never expected to see him again. Ethan looked surprised. You stayed with a stranger. For 3 hours. Sarah laughed softly. He was somebody's grandfather. I could not just leave him there. Ethan glanced around the modest apartment. His eyes paused briefly on the eviction notice still sitting on the counter. Sarah noticed, but said nothing. After a moment, Ethan opened his folder and removed another document. This one was a handwritten letter. The paper appeared old and carefully preserved. My grandfather wrote this a few months after that night, Ethan said. Sarah accepted the letter. As she read, her eyes widened. The elderly man had described meeting a young woman whose kindness restored his faith during one of the most difficult periods of his life. He praised her generosity, patience, and compassion. Near the bottom of the page, one sentence stood out. If I ever have the opportunity, I hope someone returns this kindness to her when she needs it most. Sarah looked up from the letter. Emotion flickered across Ethan's face. My grandfather never forgot you. Sarah struggled to find words. She barely remembered the encounter herself. To her, it had simply been the right thing to do. Yet Ethan was standing in her apartment more than 15 years later because of it. Why are you showing me this now? She asked quietly. Ethan leaned forward. For the first time since arriving, his expression became serious. Because before he passed away, My grandfather gave me one final responsibility. He told me that if I could ever find Sarah Mitchell, I needed to fulfill a promise. He told me that if I could ever find Sarah Mitchell, I needed to fulfill a promise. Ethan Carter's words settled heavily over the small kitchen. Sarah stared at him, unsure whether to feel curious, skeptical, or overwhelmed. The entire situation still felt impossible. A successful CEO was sitting at her kitchen table because of a brief encounter she had nearly forgotten 15 years earlier. "What kind of promise?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked down at the letter from his grandfather before answering. "That is where the story becomes complicated." Sarah folded her arms. "Complicated how?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. For a moment, he seemed less like a corporate executive and more like a grandson carrying a responsibility he had never fully understood. "My grandfather talked about you often during the last years of his life. Not constantly, but enough that our family knew your name." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "I spent a few hours helping him." "That was not how he saw it," Ethan replied. He explained that his grandfather, Walter Carter, had been struggling with memory issues during that period. One evening, he became separated from his family and wandered farther than anyone realized. The experience left him frightened and embarrassed. According to Walter, Sarah was the only person who stopped to help, not because she expected anything in return, but because she genuinely cared. "My grandfather believed that moment changed him," Ethan said. Sarah frowned. "I do not understand." Ethan smiled slightly. "Neither did I at first." He opened the folder again and removed several pages from an old journal. Walter had written about the encounter extensively. In one entry, he described feeling invisible before Sarah approached him. He wrote that many people passed by without noticing him. Yet one young woman carrying her own burdens chose kindness anyway. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she read the words. She remembered being exhausted that winter. She remembered worrying about rent, tuition payments, and working multiple jobs. Yet she had never considered that a simple conversation could have such a lasting impact on someone else. Ethan continued. "A few months later, my grandfather created something he called the Gratitude Project." Sarah looked confused. "What is that?" "A private fund dedicated to helping people during difficult moments in their lives." Sarah blinked. "Because of one night at a bus station?" Ethan nodded. "That night convinced him that small acts of kindness matter more than most people realize." For years, Walter quietly used the fund to help families facing hardships. Education expenses, medical bills, housing emergencies. He never sought recognition. He simply wanted to pass kindness forward. Sarah sat silently, absorbing the information. Then she noticed something unusual. Ethan had still not explained why he was here. The promise remained unfinished. "What does any of this have to do with me now?" she asked. Ethan's expression became serious again. Slowly, he glanced toward the eviction notice on the counter. Sarah instinctively followed his gaze. A knot formed in her stomach. "You know about that?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes." Sarah immediately felt uncomfortable. "Did you investigate me?" "Only after I found you," Ethan replied honestly. "I needed to understand your situation." Sarah looked away. She hated discussing her financial struggles, especially with a stranger. Yet Ethan's next words caught her completely off guard. "Sarah, my grandfather left very specific instructions." He reached into the folder one final time and removed a sealed envelope bearing Walter Carter's signature. "And according to those instructions, this envelope was only supposed to be opened when you needed help the most." "And according to those instructions, this envelope was only supposed to be opened when you needed help the most." Sarah Mitchell stared at the sealed envelope resting on the kitchen table. Her name was written across the front in neat handwriting that belonged to a man she had met only once. The sight felt surreal. For years, the envelope had existed somewhere in the world waiting for a moment neither she nor Walter Carter could have predicted. Ethan carefully slid it toward her. "It belongs to you." Sarah hesitated before picking it up. The paper felt fragile with age. For several seconds, she simply looked at it, unsure whether she was ready to discover what was inside. Finally, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The handwriting matched the journal pages Ethan had shown her. She began reading quietly. The letter was surprisingly personal. Walter thanked her again for the kindness she had shown him during one of the most vulnerable moments of his life. He wrote about how easily people can overlook opportunities to help one another and how deeply he had been affected by her compassion. Then the letter shifted toward something unexpected. Walter explained that after meeting Sarah, he became determined to create a way to help others. During difficult times, the Gratitude Project eventually grew larger than he ever imagined. Hundreds of families benefited over the years. Yet throughout all those years, he never forgot the young woman who inspired it. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. She continued reading. Near the bottom of the letter, Walter described a promise he had asked Ethan to honor. If Sarah was ever found, and if she was facing serious hardship, Ethan was instructed to personally deliver assistance from a fund that had been reserved specifically for her. Sarah slowly lowered the letter. "I cannot accept this," she said immediately. Ethan had expected the response. "You have not even heard the details yet." "It does not matter," Sarah replied. "I helped your grandfather because it was the right thing to do." Ethan smiled softly. "That is exactly what my grandfather said you would say." Sarah looked away, embarrassed. The attention made her uncomfortable. She had spent most of her life working quietly, solving problems alone, and doing her best to avoid becoming a burden to anyone. Ethan reached into the folder once more and removed a financial document. "The assistance is not charity," he explained. "It is a gift specifically authorized by my grandfather." Sarah glanced at the paperwork and immediately pushed it back. "No," Ethan looked surprised. "You have not even looked at it." "Because I know I cannot take it." The room fell silent. Sarah thought about Noah sleeping down the hallway. She thought about the eviction notice, the overdue bills, and the uncertainty hanging over their future. Of course she needed help, more than she wanted to admit. Yet accepting money from a stranger felt wrong. Ethan listened patiently before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah nodded. "If the situation were reversed, and you knew someone was struggling, would you help them?" Sarah answered without hesitation. "Yes." "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because it would be the right thing to do." Ethan smiled. "Then why are you denying my grandfather the same opportunity?" The question caught her completely off guard. For a moment, she had no answer. Ethan continued gently. "This was important to him. He planned it years ago. He wanted this gift to reach you one day." Sarah looked back at the letter. Part of her still resisted. Yet another part could feel the sincerity behind Walter's words. Then Ethan revealed one final detail. "There is something else my grandfather left for you," he said. "And honestly, I think it may be more valuable than the money." "There is something else my grandfather left for you. And honestly, I think it may be more valuable than the money." Ethan Carter's statement immediately caught Sarah's attention. She had spent the last several minutes trying to process the existence of the financial gift Walter Carter had arranged years earlier. Now Ethan was suggesting there was something even more important. Sarah looked at him curiously. What could possibly be more valuable than that? Ethan smiled faintly and reached for another folder. Unlike the documents he had shown her earlier, this one appeared heavily worn from years of handling. The edges were softened with age, and several pages inside were marked with notes. Ethan carefully opened it and slid it across the table. "My grandfather called this his legacy journal." Sarah glanced down at the cover. The title was handwritten in blue ink. "What is it?" she asked. "A record of the Gratitude Project," Ethan explained. "Every family that was helped. Every story that mattered to him. Every lesson he wanted future generations to remember." Sarah slowly turned the first page. She expected financial records or organizational documents. Instead, she found personal stories. Families overcoming hardships. Students receiving educational opportunities. Parents finding support during difficult times. Community members helping one another through unexpected challenges. Walter had documented them all. As Sarah continued reading, she noticed a recurring theme. Every story began with a simple act of kindness. Sometimes the act seemed small. A conversation, a meal, a ride home, a helping hand during a difficult moment. Yet each gesture created consequences that extended far beyond what anyone expected. "He really wrote all of this?" Sarah asked. Ethan nodded. For years. Sarah spent nearly 20 minutes reading without speaking. The stories affected her deeply because they felt real. Ordinary people making ordinary choices that eventually transformed lives. Finally, she reached a page marked with a yellow ribbon. The moment she saw the photograph attached to it, she froze. It was the same picture Ethan had shown her earlier at the front door. The image of her and Walter sitting together at the bus station. Beneath the photograph, Walter had written several paragraphs about the night they met. Sarah felt her throat tighten as she read. He described her kindness, patience, and willingness to stay with a frightened stranger despite her own challenges. Then she reached a sentence that made her eyes fill with tears. The young woman who helped me that winter evening reminded me that true wealth is measured by compassion, not possessions. Sarah quietly closed the journal. For years she had worried about what she lacked. Money, security, stability. Yet according to Walter, the qualities she already possessed were far more valuable. Ethan watched her reaction carefully. My grandfather wanted you to have that journal. Sarah looked surprised. Why? Because he believed it belonged to the person who inspired it. The room fell silent again. Sarah struggled to accept the idea. She had never considered herself extraordinary. She worked hard, cared for Noah, and tried to do the right thing whenever possible. That was all. Yet somehow a brief encounter had influenced a project that helped countless people. Before she could respond, Noah emerged from his room carrying his science project. He noticed the journal immediately. What is that? Ethan smiled. A collection of stories about people helping other people. Noah's eyes brightened. That sounds interesting. Sarah watched as Ethan patiently showed him a few pages. The interaction felt natural and genuine. For the first time since Ethan arrived, Sarah noticed something unexpected. He was not acting like a CEO. He was acting like someone trying to honor a promise. Then Ethan closed the journal and looked back at Sarah. There is one final thing my grandfather asked me to do, he said, and it involves a decision. That could change both your future and Noah's. There is one final thing my grandfather asked me to do, and it involves a decision that could change both your future and Noah's. Sarah Mitchell looked at Ethan Carter carefully. Throughout the evening, every answer seemed to uncover another question. What began as an unexpected knock at her door had evolved into a story she never could have imagined. Yet something about Ethan's tone suggested they were approaching the heart of the mystery. Noah returned to his room, leaving the two adults alone at the kitchen table once again. Ethan waited until the apartment was quiet before speaking. Several years before he passed away, my grandfather updated the Gratitude Project. Sarah listened closely. Ethan opened another section of the folder and removed a set of documents. He created a leadership scholarship and mentoring program for individuals who demonstrated exceptional character. Sarah immediately shook her head. That sounds wonderful, but I do not see what it has to do with me. Ethan smiled. The program was never based on income, education, or professional status. He pointed toward the journal. It was based on the qualities he believed mattered most. Sarah glanced at the pages filled with stories of kindness and compassion. Slowly, she began to understand where the conversation was heading. Ethan continued. My grandfather believed character creates opportunities that money alone cannot buy. He explained that only a handful of people had ever been selected for the program. Each participant received professional development, career mentorship, educational support, and access to a network of community leaders. The goal was not simply to help someone financially. It was to help them build a lasting future. Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable. I'm not qualified for something like that. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Why would you say that? Sarah laughed softly. Because I stock grocery shelves and manage inventory reports. I am not some future executive. Ethan's expression remained calm. That is exactly why my grandfather designed the program the way he did. He reached for the journal and opened it to a page Sarah had not yet read. There, written in Walter Carter's own handwriting, was another message. The people most capable of creating positive change are often the ones who never see themselves as extraordinary. Sarah stared at the sentence. Ethan continued. Over the past several weeks, after locating you, I spent time learning about your life. Sarah instinctively tensed again, but Ethan quickly clarified. Nothing invasive. Public records, employment history, volunteer activities. Sarah frowned. Volunteer activities? Ethan nodded. The food pantry, the literacy program, the community holiday drives. Sarah had almost forgotten about many of those efforts. She participated whenever she could, even when money was tight. Those are small things, she said. Ethan shook his head. That is what you keep telling yourself. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan slid a final document across the table. It was an official acceptance letter. Sarah's name appeared at the top. According to the document, she had been selected as the newest participant in the Carter Leadership Initiative. The opportunity included professional training, college tuition assistance if desired, mentorship from industry leaders, and educational resources for Noah. Sarah felt overwhelmed. This cannot be real. Ethan smiled. It is very real. She looked down at the letter again. For weeks, she had worried about losing everything. Now opportunities she never imagined seemed to be appearing from nowhere. Yet one question still lingered in her mind. Why me? She asked quietly. Ethan looked toward the old photograph resting beside the journal. His answer came without hesitation. Because one winter night, when nobody was watching and you had every reason to focus on your own problems, you chose kindness anyway. My grandfather spent the rest of his life believing that decision deserved to be remembered. Because one winter night, when nobody was watching and you had every reason to focus on your own problems, you chose kindness anyway. Ethan Carter's words remained in Sarah Mitchell's mind long after he left the apartment that evening. After the front door closed, she sat quietly at the kitchen table surrounded by letters, photographs, and documents that seemed impossible to believe. Noah eventually joined her, carrying a blanket and settling into the chair beside her. "Mom," he asked softly. Sarah looked up. "Yes." Noah pointed toward the acceptance letter. "Does this mean things are going to get better?" The simple question touched her heart. For weeks, she had hidden her worries from him, hoping to protect him from the uncertainty surrounding their future. Now she realized children often understand more than adults expect. Sarah smiled and gently squeezed his hand. "I think it means we have reasons to hope." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Grandpa Walter sounds nice." Sarah laughed softly. "I think he was." The following week passed in a blur of meetings, paperwork, and conversations. Ethan remained involved throughout the process, helping Sarah understand the opportunities available through the Carter Leadership Initiative. The financial assistance from the Gratitude Project immediately resolved the eviction crisis, allowing Sarah and Noah to remain in their apartment while she considered longer-term plans. Yet what surprised Sarah most was not the practical help. It was the growing realization that other people genuinely believed in her potential. During one orientation session, she met previous program participants. Their backgrounds varied dramatically. Teachers, small business owners, nonprofit leaders, healthcare workers, and community advocates. None fit the traditional image of corporate success. Yet each had used the program to expand opportunities for themselves and others. Listening to their stories, Sarah began seeing herself differently. For years, she had measured her life through limitations. Limited money, limited time, limited opportunities. Now she was being encouraged to focus on strengths she had barely recognized. Her resilience, her work ethic, her compassion, her leadership. One afternoon, Ethan invited Sarah and Noah to visit Carter Global Enterprises. The headquarters occupied a modern office building overlooking the city skyline. Sarah felt completely out of place at first. Yet, as Ethan introduced her to employees throughout the organization, something unexpected happened. People already knew her story. Not every detail, but enough to understand why Walter Carter had considered her important. Several employees shared stories about the Gratitude Project and how Walter's philosophy had influenced company culture. Kindness was not treated as weakness. It was treated as strength. Near the end of the visit, Ethan guided Sarah toward a conference room overlooking the city. Inside, a framed photograph hung on the wall. Sarah immediately recognized it. The same bus station picture from years ago. She stared at it in disbelief. "You kept this here?" Ethan nodded. "My grandfather insisted." Beneath the photograph was a small plaque engraved with a quote from Walter Carter. Sarah stepped closer and read the words. "Never underestimate the power of a person who chooses kindness when life gives them every excuse not to." Tears filled her eyes. For years she believed that winter evening had been forgettable. Yet one simple choice had created consequences she never imagined. As she stood there beside Ethan and Noah, looking out across the city, Sarah realized something important. The greatest gift Walter left behind was not money, mentorship, or opportunity. It was a new understanding of her own value. And for the first time in a very long while, she felt genuinely excited about the future waiting ahead. The months that followed brought changes Sarah Mitchell never would have imagined on the evening she stood staring at an eviction notice in her tiny apartment. Life did not transform overnight. There were still responsibilities, challenges, and long days. But for the first time in years, those challenges no longer felt impossible. Through the Carter Leadership Initiative, Sarah began taking professional development courses that expanded skills she had never fully recognized in herself. Her supervisors at the grocery company quickly noticed the difference. Within several months, she earned a promotion into a management position. The additional income brought stability, but more importantly, it brought confidence. Sarah no longer saw herself as someone merely surviving from one month to the next. She began seeing possibilities where she once saw limitations. Noah thrived as well. The educational resources provided through the initiative allowed him to explore interests that had previously been out of reach. His curiosity grew stronger each day. Whether working on science projects, reading new books, or participating in community programs, he approached every opportunity with enthusiasm. Watching her son flourish became one of Sarah's greatest joys. Throughout this period, Ethan Carter remained a consistent presence. Sometimes their conversations focused on leadership opportunities or program activities. Other times they simply talked about life, family, and the lessons Walter Carter had left behind. The friendship that developed between them was built on mutual respect and shared values. Both understood that the story connecting them had never really been about money or business. It had always been about people. Nearly 1 year after Ethan first knocked on her door, Sarah received an invitation to attend the annual Gratitude Project gathering. Families from across the state would come together to celebrate the impact of kindness and community support. At first, Sarah felt hesitant about attending. She never enjoyed being the center of attention. Yet Ethan encouraged her to come, reminding her that the event existed because of people like Walter and the countless individuals who had chosen compassion during difficult moments. On the evening of the gathering, Sarah stood before a room filled with families whose lives had been touched by the project. Looking around, she saw stories similar to her own. Parents overcoming hardships, students pursuing dreams, community members supporting one another. Every face represented a reminder that kindness creates ripples far beyond what anyone can see. During the event, Ethan invited Sarah to share a few words. Nervous but determined, she stepped to the podium. The room became quiet. Sarah took a deep breath and glanced toward Noah, sitting proudly in the front row. Then she spoke about the winter night she met Walter Carter. She described how ordinary the moment had seemed at the time. She explained that she never expected recognition or reward. She simply believed helping someone was the right thing to do. Then she shared the lesson she had learned through her own journey. We often think our smallest choices do not matter, she said. But sometimes a simple act of kindness becomes part of a story we will never fully see. The impact may continue long after the moment itself has passed. The audience responded with warm applause. Later that evening,